It is not yet 7 in the morning on October 25th, 1944. The sky over the Philippine Sea is gray, low and thick with the kind of cloud that promises nothing. Ensign William Brooks is 300 feet above the water in a TBF Avenger torpedo bomber, running a routine anti-submarine patrol out of the escort carrier St. Lo. He's not looking for battleships. Nobody is. Then, a shape on the water. Then another. Then a line of shapes, massive, moving south through the morning haze, their silhouettes wrong. Too large, too many, wrong altogether. Brooks descends for a closer look. His radio call requires no interpretation. I can see pagoda masts. I see the biggest meatball flag on the biggest battleship I ever saw. 60 miles to the south, 13 American ships were going about the business of an ordinary morning. In front of that pilot was the most powerful surface fleet the Imperial Japanese Navy had ever assembled. What followed in the next 90 minutes would violate every law of naval warfare. And the question historians have never stopped asking is not whether it happened, but how. The fleet Brooks was looking at had a name: Center Force. It had sailed from Brunei 3 days earlier under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, and nothing in the Pacific War had looked like it. 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 11 destroyers. But the number that matters is this one. At the head of that formation steamed the Yamato. She and her sister ship Musashi were the heaviest, most powerfully armed battleships ever constructed. Nearly 72,000 tons at full load, armed with 9 18-inch guns, the largest ever mounted on a warship. Each of those guns could fling a projectile the weight of a Volkswagen more than 25 miles. Yamato had been kept in reserve for most of the war. Too valuable to risk, too enormous to use freely. The Japanese Navy had held her back for a moment worth spending her on. In the minds of the men who sent her south, this was that moment. What she was steaming toward was Taffy 3, Task Unit 77.4.3. 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts. Ships built on merchant hulls, optimized for anti-submarine patrol and close air support, capable of 17 knots on a good day. None carried a gun larger than 5 inches. 5-inch shells cannot penetrate cruiser armor. Yamato alone displaced more than all 13 ships of Taffy 3 combined. To understand how that morning became possible, the story must go back 3 days and follow 3 separate catastrophes unfolding in parallel, each one invisible to the others. The first belongs to Kurita himself. On October 23rd, his flagship, the heavy cruiser Otago, was struck by American submarines in the Palawan Passage and sank in 18 minutes. Kurita went into the water. He was pulled out by a destroyer. Soaking, shaken, already sick with dengue fever, and transferred his flag to the Yamato. He had been commanding the most powerful surface fleet in the Pacific for less than a day, and he had already nearly drowned. The second catastrophe unfolded the following afternoon in the Sibuyan Sea. American carrier aircraft found Kurita's fleet in daylight and began the most sustained assault on a single ship in the Pacific War. The target was the Musashi, Yamato's sister, the second largest warship ever built, designed to be unsinkable. Over 7 hours, 259 sorties fell on her. 17 bombs, 19 torpedoes. Survivors described her stern rising from the water like a tower before she capsized. Her crew leaping and screaming, many of them striking her own massive propeller screws before they reached the sea. She took more than half her men with her. The attack cost Kurita a ship. It cost something else as well. Halsey's aviators filed damage reports claiming more than was actually inflicted. The honest mistakes of men under extreme stress. Those reports reached Admiral William Halsey, commanding the 3rd Fleet, and they told him that center force was broken, retreating, no longer a primary threat. Halsey looked north. There, beyond Luzon, a Japanese carrier force had been spotted, Admiral Ozawa's northern force, 4 carriers and their escorts moving south, visible and apparently vulnerable. What Halsey did not know, because it was the entire purpose of the operation, was that those carriers were bait. Ozawa's force carried barely 100 aircraft between them. They were offered deliberately, a sacrifice designed to pull the Third Fleet away from the one thing Japan actually needed to protect: the landing beaches at Leyte, where 130,000 American soldiers were still ashore, still building their supply lines with no armor capable of stopping a naval bombardment. Halsey went north at speed, taking 5 fleet carriers, 6 battleships, 8 cruisers, and 40 destroyers with him. He left San Bernardino Strait unguarded. 200 miles south, Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid, commanding the 7th Fleet, believed the strait was covered. Halsey had issued a contingency order about a task force that could guard the strait, and Kincaid read it as a deployment order. A done thing. He concentrated his battleships to the south, satisfied that the northern approach was someone else's problem. It was nobody's problem. 2 admirals, each assuming the other had closed the gate. At 3 in the morning on October 25th, Kurita's fleet passed through San Bernardino Strait in darkness, turned south, and began moving along the coast of Samar. He had the greatest tactical opportunity of the Pacific War directly ahead of him, and he didn't know it. He had never received confirmation that the Ozawa deception had worked. Through the long hours of that night, one question would not leave him. Where was Halsey? Where were the American fleet carriers, the fast battleships, the force that could destroy him? He was sailing toward an open door without knowing it was open. The men of Taffy 3 went to breakfast. They went to breakfast because the previous night they had heard news of Oldendorf's battleships destroying the Japanese southern force at Surigao Strait. The war seemed to be going well. The carriers were preparing airstrikes for the landing beaches. It was going to be a day like other days. 3 men stood at the center of what was coming. The first was Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, commanding from the escort carrier Fanshawe Bay, a career Navy officer and aviator, the kind of man who had spent decades learning how weather worked as a tactical instrument, how thin steel and good judgment could substitute sometimes for the armor and guns you didn't have. He knew what his ships could and could not do. The second was Commander Ernest Evans, USS Johnston, a Fletcher-class destroyer. Evans was from Pawnee, Oklahoma, a Naval Academy graduate of Cherokee and Creek descent. He was compact and dark-haired, with a thin mustache that one crewman thought made him look like Clark Gable. He had survived the Battle of the Java Sea in 1942, a retreat, a rout, the kind of thing a man like Evans did not absorb easily. He swore he would not run again. When the Johnston was commissioned on October 27, 1943, exactly a year before the morning he was sailing toward, Evans stood before his crew and told them, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." He gestured toward the gangway. No one moved. He also told them, "I will never again retreat from an enemy force." The third man was Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, commanding the USS Samuel B. Roberts, the smallest ship in the fight. Copeland was not a career officer. He was a Naval Reserve commander, a civilian lawyer pressed into command by the arithmetic of a war that needed more officers than the academies could produce. He commanded a destroyer escort of 350 tons and a crew of 200 men. On the morning of October 25th, he was about to walk to the bridge and tell them something no commanding officer should ever have to say. At 0637, Brooks' radio call reaches the Fanshawe Bay. Sprague demands positive identification. The response, from a pilot low over the water with pagoda masts filling his windscreen, leaves no room for doubt. 3 minutes later, the lookouts see anti-aircraft fire to the north. Then the first Japanese shells arrive. Colored columns of water, purple, green, yellow, The die-marked fall of shot from different ships begin rising among the carriers. The range is 15 miles. Kurita's lead ships are already firing. Sprague's orders come fast. Turn southeast, maximum speed, launch aircraft, lay smoke, and one more order, unspoken, understood by anyone who has looked at a chart. There is nowhere to run. The shore of Samar is to the west. Kurita is to the north. Leyte is behind them. 17 knots is the best these ships can do, and the Japanese cruisers make 30. What Sprague does instead is steer into a rain squall. He knows the northeast wind. He knows where the weather is. He puts his carriers into the rain and the smoke and makes Kurita's gunners earn every range correction. One more fact, which will matter shortly. The Japanese fleet is loaded with armor-piercing ammunition, fused to detonate after punching through the thick steel of fleet carriers. The ships they are chasing have no thick steel. The shells pass clean through thin hulls and fail to trigger. It is not luck. It is the irony of a fleet optimized for a battle that is not being fought. Wrong ammunition against the wrong ships, and it will save hundreds of lives before this morning is over. At 7:16, Sprague orders his screen to attack. The Johnston is already moving. Evans had turned his ship toward the Japanese fleet before the order came. Flank speed, full right rudder, charging alone toward the battleship line with his 5-inch guns already firing. For 5 minutes, the Johnston puts more than 200 shells into the heavy cruiser Kumano. Then Evans orders his torpedoes. All 10 of them. When Johnston comes back through the smoke, Kumano is burning and her bow is gone. A 2,700-ton destroyer has just blown the bow off a 13,000-ton heavy cruiser. Then Kurita's guns find the Johnston. 3 14-inch shells hit her, then 3 6-inch shells strike the bridge. The steering engine goes dead. 3 of her 5-inch mounts go silent. Evans loses 2 fingers of his left hand. He leaves the bridge, moves to the fantail, strips to the waist, and commands what remains of his ship through an open hatch, shouting orders to men who are turning the rudder by hand. He does not stop. Copeland, on the Samuel B. Roberts, has gathered his crew on the fantail. He tells them what they are sailing into. A fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. His hands, one survivor later remembered, were ice cold from fear. Then he gives the order to attack. The Roberts charges heavy cruisers with 3 torpedoes and 5-inch guns, whose shells cannot penetrate the target's armor at any range. Her gunners fire anyway. More than 200 rounds. Point blank, the cruiser Chikuma trains 2 8-inch turrets on the Roberts, a ship 1/12 her displacement. The answer to that arithmetic arrives in salvos. Above all of this, American aircraft attack with whatever they have. Bombs and rockets where they exist. Strafing runs when the racks are empty. And when everything is spent, no bombs, no torpedoes, no ammunition at all. Pilots put their planes into dives on Japanese battleships anyway, pulling out at the last moment, forcing the helmsman to turn, buying seconds, buying distance. It works. The whole battle is being purchased in seconds and distance, paid for ship by ship. Around 09:00, a salvo of 14-inch shells finds the escort carrier Gambier Bay. She is the only American aircraft carrier sunk by surface gunfire in World War II. Her crew fires her 5-inch guns against cruiser batteries until she rolls over. 6 escort carriers began this morning. Now there are 5. The destroyers Hole and Johnston are dying too. Hit too many times, answering too many Japanese ships simultaneously. Johnston alone has engaged 2 capital ships and a destroyer squadron. She is making 5 knots now, maybe less, her engines barely answering, her remaining guns still firing when they can. Evans is still on the fantail, still shouting. For a moment, it appears to be over. But the decision that would end this battle was not being made on the carriers. On the bridge of the Yamato, Kurita has been awake for nearly 48 hours. His formations are broken. 3 heavy cruisers are sunk or crippled. His flagship has been forced north to avoid torpedo tracks, losing contact with the rest of his fleet for critical minutes. Aircraft are striking from multiple directions, and now his signals officers are intercepting American radio traffic. Messages suggesting that Halsey's battleships are racing south, that powerful elements of the 7th Fleet are closing from Leyte Gulf. Halsey is not racing south. He is still hundreds of miles away, still chasing Ozawa's empty carriers. The intercepted traffic is confusion, not fact. The fragmentary noise of a battle in chaos, misread as intelligence. But Kurita does not know this. He never received word that the Ozawa deception succeeded. He has been sailing toward the greatest tactical opportunity of the Pacific War without knowing the opportunity was his to take, and now the answer he believes he has found tells him the gate he never knew was open is closing. He is winning. He does not know he is winning. At 0911, Kurita orders a general recall. The Japanese fleet turns north. On the carriers still running south, men look back. The shell splashes stop. The ships that were chasing them are turning away. Sprague, watching, called it the most amazing sight of my sea-going career. He offered no further explanation. 600 miles north at roughly this same hour, Halsey is reading a dispatch from Admiral Nimitz at Pearl Harbor. It asks in plain language where Task Force 34 is. The last 3 words, added as routine padding by a communications officer to defeat cryptographic analysis of message length, read, "The world wonders." Halsey reads them not as padding but as condemnation. He throws his cap to the deck. His chief of staff has to physically intervene before Halsey can compose a reply. Those 3 words were almost certainly an accident. The officer who chose them may have been reaching for a random phrase, or may have been thinking, consciously or otherwise, of Tennyson's poem about a suicidal cavalry charge against impossible odds. October 25, 1944 was the 90th anniversary of the Battle of Balaclava. One of the most dramatic communications of the Pacific War, the dispatch that broke one of its most powerful commanders, was likely produced by chance. Halsey eventually turned his battleship south. He arrived long after the battle was over, too late to intercept Kurita, too late to matter. He spent the rest of his life defending his decision to go north. He was not obviously wrong given what he knew. He was wrong, as 13 ships in the Philippine Sea could attest. The surface battle ended. October 25th was not finished. As Kurita's fleet turned north, pilots from a Japanese air unit appeared over the carriers and did something no American sailor had ever seen. Aimed their planes at the flight decks and kept coming. The St. Lo, which had spent 2 hours holding off the most powerful surface fleet Japan could assemble, was hit by a single aircraft and sank in 20 minutes. She became the first major warship in history sunk by a kamikaze. The men who had survived the impossible were struck by something they had no name for yet. The survivors of the Roberts, the Johnston, the Hole, and the Gambia Bay went into the water. 50 hours. Life rafts in the Philippine Sea. Communication failures delayed rescue. Coordination broke down in the chaos of the wider battle. And for 2 days, the men in the water were simply not found. Sharks came. Men died from wounds, from thirst, from the specific exhaustion of staying alive in salt water with nothing beneath you. When the counting was done, Taffy 3 had lost 1,161 killed and missing and 913 wounded. Losses comparable to Coral Sea and Midway combined. Evans was never recovered. He was seen, after giving the order to abandon ship, wounded, missing 2 fingers, in the water near what remained of the Johnston. A Japanese destroyer captain named Terauchi saw him there and rendered a salute. His crew saluted alongside him. What happened after that is not recorded. Evans was not among those rescued. He received the Medal of Honor posthumously. Fleet Admiral Nimitz, writing afterward, could find no military explanation for what Taffy 3 had accomplished that satisfied him. What he wrote was, nothing short of special dispensation from the Lord Almighty. Ships were named for the men. USS Evans, USS Clifton Sprague, USS Copeland, USS Hole, USS Johnston. In 1988, a later USS Samuel B. Roberts struck a mine in the Persian Gulf and nearly sank. As her crew fought to save her, some of them touched a plaque on the hull bearing the name of the first Roberts and the men she had carried. The ship survived. In June 2022, an explorer named Victor Vescovo piloted a submersible into the Philippine Sea. He descended past the point where light stops, past the point where pressure makes steel behave differently, past every known shipwreck, past everything. At a depth of more than 22,600 feet, nearly 4.5 miles, he found the hull of the Samuel B. Roberts. Her 5-inch gun mount was still there. Her depth charges were still in their racks, undisturbed, as if set down for a moment. Her mast had fallen. She had hit the seafloor bow first, hard enough that her stern separated by 16 feet. She is the deepest shipwreck ever discovered. No vessel in human history has come to rest further from the surface. 2 months before she was found, her last known survivor died. 2 miles away, at 21,180 feet, the wreck of the Johnston lies in the same darkness. The 2 deepest shipwrecks in the world are from the same morning, the same 60 miles of sea, the same impossible fight. The submersible's lights moved across the Roberts in absolute darkness, over the gun mount, over the depth charges in their racks, over the steel that had taken 14-inch shells and kept firing. 4 miles above, the Philippine Sea moves in the October wind, the same as it always has. She fought her way down here. The sea has kept her ever since.